So you asked me to mention our podcast. I at Biola University co-host a podcast. It's just called Think Biblically, and each week we take a cultural topic and just think biblically about it. So we'll talk about things like immigration. We'll talk about race. We'll talk about sexuality. We did one on the life of Van Gogh. Like if you want to just think culturally weekly about worldview issues, it's called Think Biblically. That's different from my YouTube channel. On my YouTube channel is where I do similar kinds of stuff, but in particular apologetics and worldview kind of engagement there. So these days there's so many different media to engage people, and part of what we have to do is think Christianly about it. Well, to piggyback off the talk this morning, when my son was 14 years old, he wanted to see this movie called Bohemian Rhapsody about the rock band. Oh, now you participate. I see how it is. And he was 14, he was PG-13, so I knew there were some ideas that I was going to take issue with, but it wasn't like an R-rated film that I wouldn't take a 14-year-old to. So I said, all right, buddy, I'll take you to the movies and pay $700 for popcorn and all that it entails. But I just asked one favor when we're done, that we just sit down and talk about it. I just want to know what you think. He goes, sure, Dad. So we brought him and a friend. We went to see Bohemian Rhapsody. We came back. And we sat down probably a half an hour. And I just asked questions like, hey, what'd you think about the movie? What was your favorite scene? Was the movie what you expected? Were there any things in the movie that as Christians we can celebrate and agree with? Were there any things that give us pause? Were there any times you felt like you were being preached at? And it was in conversation that we dialogued over that film. That's what this afternoon is meant to be, to take a step back and look more deeply at how ideas are embedded in film, but give you a way of engaging your kids and grandkids that you could do with TikTok. You could do it with an article. You could do this with a TV show. Because as we saw this morning, the prime way worldviews are passed on is through relationships and dialogue on issues with our kids. So before we jump in, one of the most interesting books I've read in 10 years is by an agnostic by the name of Jonathan Gottschall. And it's called The Storytelling Animal. His whole premise is that we're not Homo sapiens, which are thinking beings. We are Homo fictus, beings who tell stories. He says the most defining characteristic of what it means to be human is that we tell stories. And if you just stop and think about it, he's right. So movies are stories. Songs are, I was driving here yesterday on this long flight. I was like, to keep myself awake, I'm going to listen to old 90s rap music. Don't ask me why, but for some reason I was like, I just want to revisit some of the messages in these I haven't thought about forever. And I'm listening to them. Number one, cringing I ever listened to that music in high school. But second, they're all stories. Even TikTok videos are quick stories. Do you know what campaigns are? They're stories, aren't they? Think about when you sit down and have a conversation with somebody, what do? You just tell stories. To communicate, what did Jesus do? He told stories. The stories we tell, the stories we listen to, the stories we believe, more than anything else, shape the way that we live. So movies are still some of the prime ways that stories are told. As Christians, we've got to be ready to think Christianly about them. So I'm going to give you 15 seconds, though. I'm going to throw something on the screen. I want you to silently count the number of times you see the letter F appear on this screen. So 15 seconds, count the letter F, go. Three seconds. All right. How many of you got only one F? Raise your hand. Two Fs. Anybody count three? Put your hands up. Okay, put them down. Anybody count four? Anybody count five? Anybody count six? Keep your hands up. You're right, there are 6 F's on this screen. You know what you missed? All of those. What'd you miss? The ofs. Why? Because what happens when we read, we naturally skip over words like of and an and the because they don't contain any new information. They just connect words. So you read this without realizing it. You skipped over the F's when your job wasn't even to read it. All I asked you to do was count the number of F's. Now, why do I point this out? All of us have adopted ways of reading that we might not even be aware that we've adopted. Well, if that's true of reading something as simple as this statement on a screen, is that true for the way we read or watch a movie? Is that true for the way we read or watch television? Is this true for the way we read a book or we engage in ideas? The answer is yes. So if there's ways we've conditioned ourselves to do this, what about more important things when it comes to ideas in the world? Well, we're going to talk about how to analyze the worldview of film, but first we got to understand what we mean by a worldview. A worldview is basically a belief system, a view of the world that answers 3 questions. First question is, how did we get here? Origin. Every single belief system starts with a story, origin, how we got here, or you might say creation account. How do we get here and who are we? The second part of a worldview is the predicament, what went wrong? Why is the world broken? Why are things so messed up? And then third is what? The solution, resolution, how we fix it. That's basically what every worldview does. Here's how we got here. Here's how things are messed up. Here's how we fix it. That's basically what worldviews do. So whether you take things like New Age, which is a belief system that says we've eternally been here as a part of the God consciousness, the problem is we forgot we're God. So the solution is to be reminded that we're divine. Like Shirley MacLaine said, look in the mirror every day and say, I am God, I am God, I am God. Secular humanism, which is a naturalistic worldview, says we got here through some blind evolutionary process. What's wrong with the world is religion. So the solution is to get rid of religion and have a secular state. How about things like Marxism we hear a lot about today? Also atheistic, so some naturalistic material account of evolution. What's wrong with the world on Marxism is there's haves and have-nots created by capitalism. So the solution is through revolution to create a utopian state where everything is collectively owned. You might say redistribution. Islam would believe in a creator like Christianity. But what's wrong with the world is not original sin. What's wrong with the world is we're not submitted to Allah. So follow the 5 pillars and submit your life to Allah. Buddhism would say we've eternally been here going through the cycle of samsara. What's wrong with the world is we suffer because we have desires. So follow the 8-fold path to get rid of your desires. Can you see how basically a worldview is a story, isn't it? Because in stories it explains, here's the people, here's the setting, here's the problem, here's how you fix it. That's basically what a worldview is. It's a story about reality. Of course, the Christian worldview is God created us to be in relationship with Him. We sinned and are separated from Him. And salvation is by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. That's the Christian story. What's interesting is if you shift it to movies, these 3 components are present in every film. Act 1, who are we and where did we come from? It's the origin story. Think about how many movies begin with a camera panning across somebody's apartment or home with newspaper clippings telling us the background setting of who the story is about. And then what's Act 2? If it's a Jurassic World movie, the dinosaur gets out of the cage. If it's a Liam Neeson film, somebody gets kidnapped. It's the problem, right? You can't have a movie if there's no conflict and no drama. It'd be boring. And then what's Act 3? How we fix it and what are the consequences of our choices. So in a sense, worldviews are stories about reality. Movies are also stories. It's the same kind of setup and structure that we find. Now, one of the problems is I don't think we as Christians are super analytical and thoughtful about how we watch films. So, for example, you tell me which movie is better. Movie A has nudity, movie B is family friendly. Movie A has profanity, movie B is a cartoon. Movie A has disturbing images of violence. Movie B has no nudity, cursing, or violence. It feels like B, but you also feel like I'm setting you up, right? In this case, Schindler's List is A and Pocahontas is B. Now, Schindler's List was done in the 90s by Steven Spielberg, trying to show in film the horror of the Holocaust. My dad took me in high school. We went to Sizzler and we talked about it afterwards. And all those things are in Schindler's List. So it seems to me we should maybe judge a movie like Schindler's List a little differently than just the amount of nudity and violence given the purpose of that film. Pocahontas matches all those things, but they take out the Christian element and add a New Age element. So which is better? Which is more dangerous? These are interesting questions we often don't ask. Right? What's interesting is how many movies, like when you watch a movie, what happens is your defenses go down because we think I'm just being entertained. But when Pastor Chuck gives a sermon or anybody else, or you hear political speech, you know someone's trying to persuade you, so you interpret it through that lens, which you should. But when it comes to movie, they're also preaching at us, but because it's in a story and because it's entertainment, our careful, thoughtful grid often goes down. Here's a different way, let me suggest, watching film. One of the most popular shows with students right now is a show called Stranger Things. How many of you are familiar with this TV show on Netflix? This has been all the rage for the past, well, season 4, but it's been about 5 years plus for especially teenagers watching the show. And if you watch it, they finished season 4. It feels like it's telling a supernatural story. So when I watched the first episodes, the first season, I thought, oh, there's this upside down realm that's a hell type state. There's these demonic beings called demogorgons. And there's this thing called the Mind Flayer that possesses a character called Will. And in the most recent season, there's a Satan type figure called who? You guys are too holy to watch this stuff out here in Tennessee, because you know what? Your kids are watching it. Vecna. It's called Vecna. Now, you know what this show does? In season 1, when they're trying to figure out what's going on, they don't go to a pastor, they don't go to a priest. Who do the kids go to for help to solve the problem? The science teacher. Why? Because this is a naturalistic story, taking things we think are supernatural and showing that they can be explained naturally. In the most recent season, there is like hauntings and exorcisms, but they explain it away naturally rather than supernaturally. Now, I'm not even saying that's good or bad. I'm saying when we're watching this, we should be aware of ideas. It's basically setting up a supernatural worldview and subverting it through film. To me, that's a more thoughtful, critical way to watch movies. Not to mention some of the ideas in Stranger Things pushing ideas tied to certain LGBTQ ideas being pushed in Stranger Things as well. Now, one of the things that's interesting is every movie has certain elements that have to be there to tell a story. And I'm going to give you a few of these that once you see these, it'll help you watch movies more critically. And the first one is the theme. Every movie has a theme that you can basically state in one sentence. It's the idea that this movie is about. So, for example, here's one of the first. This is the original Jurassic World, not Jurassic Park, Jurassic World. The opening credits scene tells you the theme of this movie brilliantly. Take a look. Oh, that opening scene is just brilliant on so many levels. Now, what's it doing? You think you're the camera watching this, but it opens up to an eye. Why? You think you're watching the dinosaurs, but they're really watching you. And if you've seen Jurassic World, that's what happens later in the film, is they run out, think the dinosaur's gone, but the dinosaur's watching them. Now, what's the theme of Jurassic World? It's basically the theme of almost every science fiction film. If you mess with nature, nature will mess with you. You can't keep nature in its cage. That's the theme of Jurassic World. Now, another movie that came out, one of my all-time favorite superhero movies, is Infinity War. I think maybe 2018 it came out, about 4 years ago. And Infinity War, the movie opens up with Thanos, the bad guy, has Thor, one of the heroes, captured, and Thor's brother Loki has a choice to make. Will I give the Infinity Stone to Thanos or allow Thanos to kill and sacrifice my brother? Remember that. Fast forward, one of the next scenes is Gamora is in a relationship with Star-Lord, and Gamora says, hey, Star-Lord, if Thanos captures me, I want you to end my life to prevent Thanos from getting one of the stones, the Soul Stones. Fast forward, you have Scarlet Witch and Vision. Vision has one of the stones in his forehead, and Scarlet Witch has a decision. Will I destroy the stone to prevent Thanos from getting more power, but it might kill Vision? Fast forward again to one of the greatest scenes in Marvel history, in my estimation, is when Iron Man is fighting Thanos. And Doctor Strange has a decision. Will I give Thanos the Time Stone or allow him to kill and end the life of Iron Man? Do you know what the question of Infinity War is? What is the value of a human life? And when can we exchange a human life for a greater good? That's the question. And what does Captain America iconically say? He says, we are not in the business of exchanging lives. Until the only 1 in 14 million ways to prevent Thanos from destroying the entire universe is what? For Iron Man to willingly lay down his life. Now, does that sound familiar to you? You know, it's interesting, when Thanos is about to throw Gamora off this big ledge to get the Soul Stone, you have to sacrifice something you love. And she says, this is not real love. This is not true love. True love doesn't sacrifice somebody else. What did Jesus say? Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for a friend. At the heart of Infinity War, it's a brilliant question. When can we sacrifice a human life? And it's amazing. As much as I have issues with where the Marvel movies are going and concerns, in 10 years of probably the most epic filmmaking, all comes together with one hero willingly laying down his life as the only way to save the universe. Does that sound familiar? It's incredible as we look at it, but that's the theme of Infinity War. Now, there's another movie that came out a few years ago with Matt Damon in it. And this is a movie called The Martian. Has anyone seen The Martian? Do you recall this movie? Matt Damon is an astronaut, and he's left behind on Mars, and they leave in a storm, and they risk everybody's life to come back. Partly when I saw this, I was like, wow, this is a pro-life film, because if it was a dog, we wouldn't tell a story of all these humans risking their lives to go back and save a dog. Sorry, but they do it for a human being. It's somewhat similar when Jesus said, leave the 99 and go get the one. That is there's human value embedded in that. But sometimes in a movie, what happens is at the very end, the director and the filmmakers feel like they've now earned the right to preach at you. If they preach at us too soon in a movie, it'll turn us away. But if they wait until the end, they feel like you've invested yourself, you love the characters, now they have a right to speak into your life. Well, in this movie, it's about Matt Damon getting left behind on Mars, and he basically uses science to get air, to get the right temperature, and to make food. The theme of the movie is if you're stuck, use science and you can solve your problems. And at the very end of this movie, you have Matt Damon giving a speech because he's made it back. Sorry to ruin it, but you've had a decade to see this film. He's giving a speech to these future cadets, and he sums up the theme of the movie. Take a look.
At some point, everything's going to go south on you. Everything's going to go south, and you're going to say, this is it. This is how I end. Now, you can either accept that, or you can get to work. That's all it is. You just begin. You do the math. You solve one problem, then you solve the next one, and then the next. And if you solve enough problems, you get to come home.
That's the theme of the movie. That's what it's about. Now, one more movie where they're more so preaching at us is the story of Stephen Hawking, one of the most brilliant scientists over the past half century. Also was an outspoken atheist, and they did a film of his life. And again, this scene is at the end. You can tell, look closely at the expression on people's faces, the way the music sounds. The whole movie climaxes in this question of, can you have hope in a world without God? And this is the answer that's given. This is the theme of the whole movie. Here we go.
You have said you do not believe in God. Do you have a philosophy of life that helps
you? It is clear that we are just an advanced breed of primates on a minor planet, orbiting around a very average star in the outer suburb of one among 100 billion galaxies. But ever since the dawn of civilization, people have craved for an understanding of the underlying order of the world. There ought to be something very special about the boundary conditions of the universe. And what can be more special than that there is no boundary? And there should be no boundary to human endeavor. We are all different. However bad life may seem, there is always something you can do and succeed at. While there is life, there is hope.
That's the theme of the movie. Even without God, there's hope and there's purpose. Did you see the looks on their faces? They're in awe. They're looking with reverence. The music is hopeful. They're trying to convince you that you can have a hopeful life without God. Every single movie has a theme. And if you pay attention, the music and the dress and the lighting contributes to that core theme, that idea. Now, second, of course, is the hero or the heroine. Every movie has a key hero. You might think of key heroes, whether it's Wonder Woman, Luke Skywalker, Harry Potter. In this case, who's the hero? Actually, she's the hero in this movie. Don't confuse the Clint Eastwood wearing a gun American hero with the hero of the story. By the way, sorry to ruin it for you, but again, you've had time. She's the one who lets the T-Rex out that kills the other dinosaur anyways. He plays the muscle and the guns in this, but she's really the hero. It's about her life and her transformation more so than him. She actually plays a heroic role. Now, in some movies, the hero is obvious because the movie's named after it. Here's one of my favorite recent heroes.
In the right hands, the relationship between man and the suit is symbiotic. The suit has power. The man harnesses that power. You need to be skillful, agile, and above all, you need to be fast. You should be able to shrink and grow on a dime, so your size always suits your needs. Now dive through the keyhole, Scott. You charge big, you dive small, then you emerge big.
Useless.
Now, it's called Ant-Man, and you know what he said? He goes, the theme of this movie is don't judge something by its size. Small things have great power. That's the theme of James chapter 3. A rudder in a ship, a spark for a forest fire is like the tongue. Small things have great power. But in this case, Ant-Man is clearly the hero because it's about the story Ant-Man. Now, third is the hero has a goal. What's the task that the hero is trying to accomplish? So in the Avengers Infinity War, they're trying to stop Thanos from getting all of the Infinity Stones, from wiping out half the universe, ironically, to save the universe. Now, in The Martian, he's stranded on Mars. What's the goal? To get home. How many movies can you think of the goal is to get home? Pretty much think of any Disney film, and the goal is to get home, right? Nemo, get home. You name it. There's something about getting home. By the way, there's only so many stories you can tell. There's only so many stories you can tell. So if you've seen movies, this will take me back. Dances with Wolves is basically the same movie as The Last Samurai and the same movie as Avatar. Just different setting, different characters. And pretty much all modern films, the stories have already been told in the Bible anyways. So the latest Wolverine movie is basically the story of Moses, the old leader who doesn't get to go in the promised land. The original Wolverine movie is Adam and Eve, sibling rivalry. So there really is nothing new under the sun. But of course, there's always some goal, and often it's just to get home. Now, of course, in every film, there's an adversary or a villain. And the better the villain, the better the show, right? So sometimes the villain is something in nature like a dinosaur, right? Sometimes some of the greatest, you tell me, when the great villains come to mind, who do you think of? Darth Vader is hard to beat. Who else? Thanos. Who'd you say? Oh, King Kong. Okay, I thought he was a good guy. There's movies about King Kong. Wicked Witch of the West is a classic villain, right? How about Voldemort? How about the Joker? The Heath Ledger Joker? Partly the greater the villain, the greater the story. So one of the reasons Justice League by DC was somewhat lame in my view is the villain was just like, I just want to destroy the universe. It's like, yeah, everybody wants to destroy the universe or rule the universe. But Thanos, on the other hand, was what? Somewhat sympathetic. You kind of, at least for a moment, would stop and think, could Thanos be right? What would I do? That's what a powerful villain is like. Now, sometimes it's just nature, right? In fact, one of the movies a number of years ago, long before COVID, was Outbreak, and the villain was kind of a pandemic, so to speak, interestingly enough. And in this case, Thanos was the villain. So every story, you have a villain, right? Now, what's also interesting in films is you have the character flaw of the hero. There's often, when you find out who the hero is, you find out some flaw in the hero. So the story's not just about killing the villain. It's about the hero or the heroine finding him or herself. So if you go back to the original Jurassic World film, what was her character flaw? And I chose a picture to communicate it. She was a workaholic. Her priorities were misplaced. She didn't really care enough about family. So it took the dinosaurs getting out of the cage and her nephews almost dying to reorient her life and realize that family is more important than fame. Even characters like Captain America, in Captain America 2, he lost the identity of who he was and had to be reminded why he wanted to be a hero. Luke Skywalker, what's Luke Skywalker's character flaw? He's young and rash and arrogant. Needs to be humbled. Every character has some kind of flaw. Now, once you know who the hero is, and once you know who the villain is, what do you know there's going to be? A final confrontation. It's always going to happen. So if in a Rocky or Creed film, Rocky or Creed fights the villain halfway through the film, sorry to ruin it for you, but we know Rocky and Creed are going to lose so they can then come back and win at the end. There's always a final confrontation at the end that it builds towards. So you also know if a secondary character is fighting the villain, the secondary character is not going to win. It can't work. There has to be the final confrontation. So of course, back to Avengers, the end of Infinity War was the final confrontation. One by one, the Avengers fight Thanos and they all get defeated. So think about whatever movie it is. Maybe it's an old movie like The Perfect Storm, where really the villain is kind of nature and these three storms that hit at the same time. You know there's going to be confrontation where either the waves win and they die or they make it through and survive. The final confrontation is coming. So you mentioned Wizard of Oz. What do you know there's going to be? A final confrontation. It builds until the climax at the end. Now what makes a movie partly great and more drama is that there has to be an apparent defeat. Right? Isn't it amazing when you think about movies how much these are present? Is you have the villain and you have the hero, and there has to be this moment where you think there's no way the hero or heroine can get out of this. It's hopeless, it's lost. Oh no. Right? How many movies have we seen where the bad guy has a gun, good person's on the ground, or a sword, they go, ha ha ha, got you. And at that last second they go to click, what happens? Either they flip the sword up and stab him, or someone from behind shoots him. There's that moment where you think all is lost. And by the way, what's the greatest apparent defeat? It's death. Because death is a thing that cannot be overdone. That's the greatest apparent defeat. So you think about the end of Infinity War, what was the apparent defeat? Even Spider-Man was fading away into oblivion. Death came. Now, are you noticing something before I give the last two? How many of these elements can you see in the Christian story? Hero, Jesus, hard to get a greater hero than that. Villain, Satan, good luck topping Satan. The apparent defeat was what? On the cross. There's one big one lacking in the story of Jesus, namely the character defect. Although even in the garden, Jesus sweats like blood and says, Father, take this cup from me. It's very interesting. So you see these elements in the story of Peter, don't you? The rash, young, kind of character defect hero who speaks too quickly, but then has the apparent defeat with Jesus, gets restored to become the true hero. So you see these elements in the Christian story, which is so fascinating. And then, of course, once you have the apparent defeat, you have a victory, and then the self-revelation of the hero. What the hero learns, and what is this revelation tied to? The hero's what? The hero's character defect. It's what's learned from the story. So to me, I haven't even seen the most recent Thor. I just can't. Eventually, I'll see it when it's on Disney Plus. But the way they're deconstructing that character and the direction they're taking him is just so disappointing to me. I just don't want to see it. Partly because Thor 1, in my view, is one of the great Marvel movies and beyond. Why? It's the classic story of the hero. He's young and he's rash and he's arrogant like Luke Skywalker. So he decides the old king doesn't know what he's talking about. He's going to attack the bad guys for himself, but he's foolish and he's rash. So what happens? So his father banishes him down to earth, takes his powers away. And he will only get his powers back when he's sufficiently broken and humbled. Then he can truly be king. And there's a scene in that movie where this big silver destroyer is about to kill a bunch of people, and Thor doesn't have the power to stop him. He steps right in front and he speaks through this machine to his brother, and he basically says, "Take me. I'm ready to die." And at that moment, he gets the hammer back because now he's ready to be a hero. That happens with Luke Skywalker, doesn't it? Vader has to chop off his hand to humble him. Then he's ready to be a Jedi and ready to be a hero. These are biblical ideas, aren't they? Peter has to be humbled and has to be broken by denying Jesus. Then Jesus can restore him. Now he's ready to be a shepherd and to lead the flock because he's suffered and he's been restored. The final piece is, by the way, at the end of Thor, I just love it. I get teary-eyed when I think about it. He's out on the deck with his father because at the beginning he just thinks his father's rash and foolish. In the final scene, he says to his father, he's like, "Maybe I could become a king like you someday." It's this powerful sense that now he has this newfound respect for his father. And then over the next few movies, they just deconstruct and ruin everything they built in Thor 1, but I digress. And the last one is the resolution. What now follows for the journey and the story that we've been on together? So if you watch Infinity War and Endgame, the resolution of Endgame was about half of the movie at the very end, resolving what happens to Black Widow and Hawkeye, what happens to Captain America, what happens to Iron Man's family. They just, because it's been 10 years in the making, they show a resolution. And typically at the end of a movie, what happens is if there's, it's like a Die Hard film, there's some attack and then all of these ambulances are there and somebody's sitting there and they're talking about what they learned through this drama, and they tie up all the loose ends, and then somebody either walks down a train track or walks through a road into the sunset. That's how stories work. And when we begin to see the subjective structure in film, what can happen? We can then start to have conversations with people and engage them over the beliefs contained within. So with my own kids and with others, here's just some of the kinds of questions I try to do. I'll throw some of these out there, and then we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A. I start with, what is good about the movie I can praise? As Christians, sometimes as evangelicals, we lead with criticism, don't we? We just do. That's what we're known for. I want to start by finding something positive I can praise within a film. And in basically every film, you're going to find something positive. So I'm asking my kids, hey, what was positive in that film? What's the takeaway? Second, do we see the consequences of sin, or is sin praised? So does the movie show sin as if it's cool, or does it show the results of sin? So one thing I do with my students when I teach a whole worldview film is I'll show clips of 2 different movies that are rated R. One is the iconic, famous scene, the elevator scene from The Matrix, when Neo and Trinity walk in to free Morpheus, and they're dressed in black, and they have shades on, and they have all these weapons, and they destroy all these guards, and there's video game music going on. It's R for violence, but it just looks cool. Students see that, they're like, dang, I wish I had a trench coat like that. That looks awesome. And then I'll show them the first 20 minutes of Saving Private Ryan, which is also R for violence. That's another Steven Spielberg movie, and it's harrowing. There's nothing that makes you think, oh, awesome, give me a gun, I want to storm D-Day. Nothing that makes you do that. 2 movies. Both are for violence, but portray it very, very differently. So I want to ask kids and young people, hey, how does it portray sin? Does it make you want to be violent? Does it make you want to commit adultery? Does it make you want to use profanity? Or like the Bible, which, by the way, the Bible's full of some pretty graphic stuff, isn't it? Don't believe me, just read the book of Judges. But what's the theme of Judges? Everyone did that which was right in their own eyes. So the scene, the end scene of what happens to this prostitute is horrible. The way she's treated and she's cut up into pieces. It's like, this is in the Bible. Why? Because the writers want us to see that if you forget God and become your own moral standard, this is what it's going to lead towards. So the Bible doesn't praise sin. It includes immoral sexual behavior and violence, so we see where that leads to. I want to compare and contrast that with a film and say, is it praising it? Or is it showing the consequences of sin? These are really important questions to ask. Third one, what's the moral of the story? And can we celebrate it? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So a movie with Tobey Maguire, and it was a movie called Cider House Rules, a number of years ago. It's a pro-abortion movie that basically sometimes abortion is the most compassionate thing and you should embrace it. That's the moral of that story. Obviously, we can't embrace that, but we should be aware of the morals. 4, how are Christians or religion portrayed in the film? How is religion viewed? So in the recent Stranger Things season, there's not a lot of religion, but there's one character who's one of the villains who's quoting scripture. I'm like, yep, there they go. The quoting scripture is the hypocrite and the bad guy. That's how they're portraying religious characters. Now, that's not always true. Sometimes religious characters are actually very sympathetic. But I want to know, how is religion portrayed, if at all? And if you look closely, there's a double standard to how Christianity is portrayed compared to many other religions. And finally, what's the worldview of the film? What's the idea being pushed in the film? Now, I'm not somebody who says you shouldn't watch a movie that has a different worldview. I don't only watch movies of people that agree with me, but I want to see the worldview. I want to analyze the worldview, and I want to run it through a Christian lens. That's very different. So these kind of questions are, you can ask more, you can ask less, but this is what I try to do with my kids. I try to do in my classroom. We'll do this with popular songs, YouTube videos, TikTok, articles or blogs, and current events. Just simply saying what's positive in this, what's negative in this, what ideas are coming through, and how do we think Christianly about it. Doing this in relationship is a powerful way to pass on faith to this next generation. Now, a ton more can be said. We've got a mic. I want to make sure we had time. Good. We have about 12 minutes. Questions, if I skipped over something, something maybe didn't make sense, something I could expand upon. What questions do you have about this, or maybe how this applies to other kinds of media? One of the ways this generation communicates is with memes, just memes. So oftentimes I'll just take a meme and be like, hey, what is this saying? Why is it saying this? Is this effective? Is this true? Is this fair? And we just analyze and talk about memes. Thoughts, questions? Yes. You were moving a lot faster this morning, Justin, just for the record.
I had Corky's for lunch, so I'm moving a little bit.
That's where he took me. It was good.
No, I was just curious as to what age you start asking these types of questions. We have preschoolers at home. We have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old and one on the way. So questions like this in depth aren't applicable right now, But at what age do you start doing that, or do you have any questions we could ask preschoolers at that age?
So the most important thing with young kids is to build a relationship that they feel known and they feel trusted and they feel secure. But with that said, kids are much more capable than you think of seeing basic ideas in film. Now, a preschooler is what, 4 years old? Like abstract thinking is obviously not there. But I had my son when he was, I think he was in second grade. We would start, basically what I would do is I would start asking questions early and just see when it registered, when it clicked. Obviously, a preschooler's attention span is a little bit less than a high schooler, not in all cases, but in many cases. So I just start asking simple age-appropriate questions, even just at that age. Hey, what'd you think about this? Do you like it? Why do you like it? Who's your favorite character? Just like simple things like that start a kind of dialogue young and early that as you get older, you just get more and more sophisticated. So I've watched a ton of shows. When The Flash started 10 years ago, my son was like, I guess he was about 7 or 8 years old. We started watching as a family. And I just told him, I said, sometimes your dad's just going to stop it and make a point. Few and far between. Do it too much, they won't watch movies with you. But I'd stop now and then and say, okay, kids, look, do you see what they're doing? I just want you to understand they're kind of preaching an idea at you here. It's okay, we can watch this, but do you see why? Yeah, Dad, we got it. Okay, let's keep going. So start early, ask questions, and you'd be amazed at how early they can pick up on certain things.
I had an opportunity for that exact thing when my daughters were in preschool, and we were watching the movie Frozen. I just learned, don't assume that a movie's good because it's for preschoolers. But the song came on Let It Go, and there's a line that says, no right or wrong, no rules for me. And to translate that into his talk, it's called progressive individualism. I define myself by who I am as an individual. So I had to ask my daughter Maddie, and I said, do we have rules in our house? Yes. I'm like, all right, here's a reason, and God makes rules, and you're not free just to do whatever you want. But the good thing about Frozen is that her own choices are for the detriment of what goes on around her. So there's a good lesson.
That's right. But even something like Frozen, start with a positive, and then you get to where we're critical and we're concerned.
So what would you say to a parent who would like to teach these same worldview lessons to their children without potentially exposing them to Hollywood's over-sexualized content and them thinking that's okay?
So I think the best I can say is use your instinct as a mom. And my wife and I go back and forth. I think this is why kids need a mom and a dad. I'm like, let them watch it. It's fine. And she's like, yeah, maybe you haven't really thought this through. She's like the mom in the nest. I'm like, push them out. Let them figure it out. So we find the tension between the two. That's a healthy dynamic, I think. So one thing is kids are different. So a friend of mine let his son, when he was 8, see the original Spider-Man. And the end scene is somewhat violent with Green Goblin and Spider-Man. And his son is crying. He's like, Dad, why'd you let me watch this movie? And he felt like the biggest failure doing that. My son at 7 was like, this is awesome. When are we watching number 2? They're just different kids. So we've just got to use our parenting sense of, is this appropriate? How old are you? What's the message here? And just kind of gauge what's unique about a kid. I wish I could say, hey, we don't have to talk about these issues until kids are 12 and 14, but that's not the world we live in. It's not the world. So I'd rather start the conversation sooner and frame it with them than later. I was driving the car, and my 8-year-old, he's 10 now, he goes, Dad, what's abortion? He's 8. Now, he heard his older sister, who was 13, and a kid at school, it comes up. So instead of saying, don't talk about that, I said, oh, hey, buddy, I'm happy to tell you. Why do you ask? He told me where we heard it. I said, well, abortion, in an age-appropriate way, I just thought, okay, he's 8. I said, sometimes women get pregnant, and they decide they don't want to keep the baby. Well, why would they do that, Dad? And I just did my best in an age-appropriate way to speak truthfully to him, not give him too much information, but he asked me a question and deserves an answer. So I think our kids are capable of much more. And if it's in the context of a relationship, I think if we have a relationship with our kids and we help them think Christianly, most of them are not going to get taken in by seeing a film here or there or a song here or there if we're doing the larger picture of what God calls us to. Yeah, I see one back there. Or wherever. Go.
Are you dialed into the Comic-Con?
I've been a couple times, but I'm not really dialed in.
We've got a youngest son who's into it, and I feel kind of lost around it. I don't even know how to get involved with it.
You know what? How old's your son? 22. Okay. So I went to Comic-Con when I was like 13. And I was talking with my son about going next summer. I have somebody maybe give me tickets. Maybe. You know what? If your son is 22, he's out of the house. I just spend a lot more time asking questions and listening to him than I would anything else. When did you get into comics? What's your favorite one? What are you looking forward to at this upcoming Comic-Con? Would you ever take your dad with you just to be with you there? I'm dead serious. And just go. And it might, I don't know your son, it might be easy to be judgmental, but just hold back and enter his world and spend that time with him and find ways to build bridges is what I would do. My dad bought me comics when I was a kid, and some people thought it was insane and irresponsible. And you know what? Obviously, he didn't buy me just any comic. Like, he filtered them, but he knew that was interesting to me, entered into my world, and took me to Comic-Con one year, believe it or not. So, especially if he's 22, I would pour into him and find out, what it is that he loves about it and go. So that's what I would do. Yeah, go ahead. I thought I saw a hand back right there. We got two coming this way. We'll take these two and then probably have to wrap up.
Well, one thing, I'm in my 60s, but I can't remember what the movie we saw, but we said, that was a good movie, except the F word. It's the language so much, when our kids are watching it and the world today, that word is something that's said just all the time in different mannerisms. How do you explain that to a kid or teenager? I've subbed in high school and
I know. Look, I'm with you. I don't like that. My son, when he started turning 17, 18, liked country and liked some rap songs that would have lyrics I didn't like. And I didn't want to be criticizing him all the time, but I also want to say, hey, buddy, what's the song saying? What are you filling your mind with? So we would have certain boundaries, like in our home. When a kid's 12 and 13, that's a little different control when somebody's 17, 18, 22, right? Like, I don't want this being played out loud in my home. I don't want to hear it when I'm sitting in my home. Your mom doesn't want to hear it. So there's a time where you have certain boundaries and make it clear. I think we need to do that. But the other distinction is it depends how the word is being used. So if it's a Vietnam War movie, there's probably going to be some F-bombs. If they don't, it's not going to be a very realistic film. That's different than a movie that just adds F-bombs in an unnecessary way just to be cool or funny. I run out of patience for that. So I try to help my kids say, okay, what's this film doing as it uses profanity? Is it portraying it realistically? Okay. Is it just trying to be funny and get ratings? That's very different. They're trying to manipulate us here. What do you think about that? So those are two of the ways I'll approach that. So great question. I'm with you.
How do you talk to kids about the dangers of pornography? That's probably a whole hour.
Oh, gosh. That is a
You have 30 seconds.
Yeah, 30 seconds.
Blow our minds. Thank you.
I guess here's the best I can do for you. I think about 3 months ago, I interviewed Dr. John Fobert, who wrote the single best book on a guide for parents and educators to talk to kids about pornography. I forget the exact title. It's like The Dangers of Pornography, How to Talk to Kids About Pornography. But if you just go to my YouTube channel, Dr. John Fogarty has a lot of science and data behind it. It's biblically based. It's a short book. And for an hour, I just walked through very practical ways to talk with our kids about pornography. That's the best interview that I've heard. So I think that's the best I can do in 30 seconds. But a couple things in common with this is start early. Got to start early. And I think we don't just talk about porn. What happens in movies, for example, when I talk with my kids, is my wife and I will use examples of relationships and sexuality to say, hey, like when we're watching The Flash, this couple moves in together. We're like, hey, what do you guys think the Bible says about that? Is this a good idea? Does this movie show sin, or is it just praising it? Remember, there's God's design for marriage. And when we step outside of it, that's actually when people get hurt. That's a way of building in a positive sexual ethic, of which, of course, pornography twists. So start early and do it in the context of a relationship, and then hopefully that video would help you out. So such a good question that I wish I could go into more. That'd be an entire session to do some afternoon in the future. There's some great folks. Last chance, the book, there's a decent number left, so the next generation will know. If you haven't picked up one and you're looking for a practical guide how to have these conversations, including the one you're talking about, this is the one for parents, for adults, for grandparents. And then a Rebels Manifesto, this talk was actually one of the chapters where I talk about worldview in film, how to ask questions of students, but I do it in a way for students to think about this. So this book is all for students. I mean, here's some of the chapters, and I designed it that parents would read it with kids. Politics, loneliness, bullying, racial tension, homosexuality, poverty, immigration, knowing God's will. There's a chapter on pornography. So it's a chapter you can read with a young man or with a young girl to just start this conversation. The O's are over there if that's helpful. Did I miss anything that you wanted me to cover?
Would y'all join me in thanking Sean for our afternoon
You're welcome.
session?